We're going to just cut to the chase. Obviously, this is taped, but for people listening to us on the radio, we thank you so much for listening. If you do hear this on a podcasting site, we do thank you for listening to us on that. Like, subscribe, share. But for the radio listeners, we've been teasing this for a couple of weeks now. We finally got a very special guest. We've got a lot of calls from people to have this man on. It is Tony Lyons. He is the president and founder of Skyhorse Publishing. Skyhorsepublishing.com. He's also the co-founder of the American Values PAC 2024. It is the PAC supporting Bobby Kennedy Jr. Tony, thanks so much for coming on. A lot of news that's been breaking about Bobby Kennedy Jr., so we're grateful to have you on at this time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So let's kick this around. Obviously, Friday was a big day for the RFK Jr. campaign. Bobby suspended his campaign in about 30-ish, 10-ish states, excuse me. He'll still be on the ballot on 30-ish states, mostly Democrat and Republican states. What is your opinion on RFK Jr. endorsing President Trump at this time?
I think it was a great move. We had seen months and months of the DNC rigging every part of the democratic process. From the primaries to the media, where they use censorship and propaganda to lie to the public on the stories of what he really believes, what he would do as president, what he's done in the past. They really were trying to take people's voting rights from them. They rigged the whole ballot access system. They sued him in 11 states and were prepared to sue him in 18 more states. So just making a mockery, a total mockery of the whole democratic process while they're claiming to want to protect democracy. So in that sort of picture of Bobby Kennedy being subjected to this just onslaught of anti-democratic moves from the DNC, he had to do something. And he wanted to do something that would further as many of the things that he cares about and that his voters and his backers, the things that really matter to them. And he was given the opportunity to do that. He had talks with Donald Trump, and Trump made it clear that many of the things that really matter to Bobby Kennedy, he's willing to pursue. And those things are freedom of speech, children's health, getting out of the foreign wars, protecting the border. So those are places where they really have common ground. And, Bobby had to do something that was likely to work. And all of the different games that the DNC played, didn't really work up until they started to play games with the polling. And that's where they really started to make headway. And it was a totally corrupt process. But what they did was they were asking people from multiple polling sites whether they wanted to vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And they were leaving Bobby Kennedy off of that polling. And then they were claiming that Bobby Kennedy got 0% in that polling, and then doing compilations of polls and saying that of 10 polls, Bobby Kennedy had gone from something like 18 to 20% all the way down to 4%. It was a total fiction. They were lying to the public, but they were convincing people that Bobby Kennedy didn't have any chance. And that was the point at which I think he realized the system was so corrupt that he had to do something to fight for the principles that matter to him.
I think we can all agree on many things, most of them you just spoke about, but also the debate issue, that with the percentages that Bobby had throughout the campaign, he should have made the debate stage if the first debate. I know he had a debate where he wasn't in person with President Trump or President Biden, but he was doing it over Twitter and YouTube. His answers, it obviously did get a lot of good ratings, but it wasn't the same as him being on the stage and really hammering away against them face to face. So that was the big issue I had, along with the ballot issues, along with the polling, as you stated, Tony. I want to talk about this because I'm personally injured from the COVID-19 vaccine. We have a lot of people that have been injured by the COVID-19 vaccine that listen to this program. I've personally read the real Anthony Fauci. We've had Dr. Malone on many times, Dr. Peter McCullough, and many other doctors, Pierre Corey, the list goes on and on, speaking about this issue. And I know this is near and dear to Bobby's heart, along with your heart. Talking about President Trump, as you said, they are allies with freedom of speech, health, immigration, the list goes on and on. But obviously, you know as well as I do, President Trump did push Operation Warp Speed. He will not go out and say anything wrong about, we got to be careful how we say this, Tony, on the radio and the podcasting sites. We'll say the jab. He will refuse to say that the jabs afflicted any illnesses on people, any deaths on people. So is this a tough position for Bobby to agree with President Trump on? Because we know that he breaks a lot of promises in general, and he did that back in 2016 through 2020 when he was running for president and was president.
Yeah, so I think that Bobby Kennedy feels confident that Donald Trump and his whole team are 100% behind the things that really matter to Bobby Kennedy, the top 80%. And that really focuses on children's health, on war, on free speech. And Donald Trump has talked about children's health. He's talked about vaccines for many, many years. He's been consistent there. His views on warp speed, haven't been at the level that we would have liked to see. But the fact that he's backing Bobby Kennedy and the fact that he wants Bobby Kennedy to be part of his team, part of his inner circle, is a very good step towards having a senior person in government who sees these things clearly. And if you've read the real Anthony Fauci, that was the best book, at a critical point that came out. It was the most censored book in my lifetime. It wound up selling more than 1.3 million copies, despite this just unprecedented censorship on every level, from bestseller lists that it was kept off, to newspapers that never mentioned it, to websites that made it hard to find, that shadow banned it. But there was this incredible word of mouth that came from it, and this incredible team of people who went on to radio shows, podcasts, any TV shows that would have us on. I was on Tucker Carlson twice to talk about it. So, we really were able to break through with that book. But I think that the fact that Donald Trump is willing to give this platform to Bobby Kennedy is a sign that he recognizes that, there are things that would need to be done differently in the future, and that Bobby Kennedy would be part of the mix, part of the decision-making process.
Let's talk about Bobby Kennedy endorsing Donald Trump, how it affects the race. Obviously, I'm personally a supporter, as you are too, running the pack. I know a lot of supporters on Twitter and online. Most of them are going towards President Trump, the people that are in the swing states. Now, I'm lucky, Tony, that I'm in Florida, which President Trump will win the state of Florida. I can still vote for Bobby Kennedy. But what about the people that are in these swing states? Are you seeing that this endorsement of President Trump, they're moving towards him, or they're staying with Bobby, maybe write him in, or they're just not going to vote in general?
I think people who, there's a very big percentage of the people who were going to vote for Bobby Kennedy who didn't vote in 2016 and in 2020. So we know that from various polling that was done. And those people just don't believe that the government cares about them. They don't trust their politicians. They don't trust government agencies, but they really do trust Bobby Kennedy. And I think that those people recognize that voting for Trump in the key swing states, in those states where Bobby Kennedy is pulling out of and taking himself off the ballot, those states are places where their vote for Donald Trump is in fact a vote for the things that they care about, for the things that Bobby Kennedy cares about and that he's fought about for the last 40 years.
Do you feel like, obviously, Bobby being on the ballot, like I said, in 30 other states, obviously, like I said, I'm in Florida, can still vote for Bobby Kennedy Jr. I will be still, that he can get at least that 5% threshold to get that $13 million, build the party, maybe work in a Trump administration, and really build this movement at 70 years old that will outlive him rather.
Sure. So, he would be 74 in 2028. But if you look at Bobby Kennedy, I mean, he is so incredibly mentally and physically fit,
Yeah.
so much more so than any of these other politicians. I mean, you have senators who are in their 70s and their early 80s. These are really old people. Bobby Kennedy has just an incredible memory. You see him on Joe Rogan. He talks without notes for 3 hours and 8 minutes, with incredible recall of facts, of research that's been done, of history. And then if you look at his physical condition, there's really no other politician who's in the kind of shape he's in. He can do 24 pull-ups. He's hikes all the time. He eats healthy foods. He's a real model. He's a real role model for the public on what's possible. So Bobby Kennedy at 74 years old is really like somebody else at 50.
And we've seen the physical fitness test of, JFK. When he was in there, he made a very big emphasis on physical fitness. So did Bobby's dad in general. So it is sticking with that family tradition. Again, for people listening, this is Tony Lyons, president and founder of Skyos Publishing. It is skyospublishing.com. He is the co-founder of American Values PAC 2024, supporting Bobby Kennedy Jr. Tony, let's get into this. Obviously, there's a lot of suspicions. We do have 70 some odd days till the election, so a lot could happen till then. If President Trump does win, can you see Bobby in a position of power in the Trump administration, whether it's Attorney General, CDC director, FDA director, or HHS?
Yeah, I would think that he's going to wind up in those kinds of roles, and that he's really going to get a very high percentage of the things that he and his followers want. And that's the key, that I saw last week as a real victory for all the work that he and his team and his followers and our PAC did over the last 18 months. That, that with so much corruption of the democratic process, mostly coming from the DNC, he was in a position where he was just going to fail, with them spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars to take him down. And he then, as he's done so many times in his life, was not willing to just cave. He's not like Bernie Sanders, where you can attack him in every way, go after his family, all of these kinds of things. And then he endorses the very people who did that to him. Bobby Kennedy recognizes that the Democratic Party that you see in front of you now is not the Democratic Party of his father and his uncle. These are not good people. These are corrupt people. Bobby Kennedy has the values that his family had traditionally, and the family members who have gone against him, in the last couple of days, but throughout this entire campaign. Those are people who are not real Democrats. Those are just people who are part of this corrupt group, this, corporatist group who's pro-war, pro-big corporation, doesn't care about public health, doesn't care about voting rights, doesn't care about the electoral process in this country. So Bobby Kennedy is a real Democrat. And there are a lot of real Democrats who are, flooding away from the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party doesn't stand for anything other than corruption.
I want to move towards the end of the interview with these last few questions, Tony. When we talk about the PAC and how, obviously this campaign has been suspended, what is the PAC up to now, Tony? Are they going to be still involved with making sure Bobby stays on the ballot in New York and these other states that the Democratic Party has been pushing Bobby off the ballot in?
Yeah, we're going to follow his lead, from public statements that he makes, from his website, from the campaign website, from his Twitter. This is about the issues. So we continue to support him on the major questions of children's health, chronic disease, foreign wars, freedom of speech, all of those things that are traditional Democratic Party values that the current Democratic Party has abandoned.
I want to ask you this because we just spoke when I asked you the question about the New York ballot issue. When we speak about these ballot issues, New York, Pennsylvania, with that said, Tony, do you see the Democratic Party backing off on some of these issues, or do you feel like that they are going to still proceed with these issues now that Bobby's kind of drifted away from the race a little bit?
You know, I've been shocked by the Democratic Party and by the sort of brazenness of their whole campaign against Bobby Kennedy. They haven't even really been acting like political people, because you would think that they would have followed him and looked at his polling numbers in each state. And there were states where Bobby's presence helped Kamala Harris, but they didn't even look at that. They just decided to attack everybody who was from a third party, mostly Bobby Kennedy, but Jill Stein too, and various other people. And so they had this feeling that they have all the power, all the money, they can do whatever they want, they don't care about democracy, and they're not even being logical. So I think they're going to keep right on fighting because they want to send the message that there is not really democracy in this country, that it's a two-party system, that they're going to have all the money. They don't want any outsiders coming into the process. They're backing this duopoly. They're backing all of these big pharmaceutical companies, big agricultural companies, all the foreign wars. I mean, they are backing all of the things that any true Democrat wouldn't want. And they don't even care about the details. They don't seem to even care about winning. And that's why I believe they're going to lose, maybe really dramatically.
I want to move into some quick audience questions as we move, as I said, to the end of the interview, Bobby. I mean, Tony. So let's talk about this. So Bobby obviously running for president back in 2023. Let's speak about that. Because you've been friends with Bobby for quite a long time, Tony, can you talk about how this all started? Was this due to the censorship on Twitter and even with the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, throughout COVID and the vaccine issue? Or was this kind of a long time coming for Bobby Kennedy due to his past successes with the environmental lawsuits, etc.?
Yeah, Bobby brought something between 400 and 500 lawsuits over a 30, 40 year period. And during that time, he had so many victories to sort of make sure that big corporations didn't destroy the environment for the future of the people who live in this country just to make money, or big corporations didn't destroy the health of our young children just to make money, lying to the public, giving things to children that they knew actually harmed people or that they should have known. And then also going after government agencies that haven't been doing their jobs, that are colluding with these big companies to just sort of fleece the American public. And, what we've seen is that the budget for places like, the CDC or the FDA comes, something like 60 to 75% from the companies that they're supposed to regulate. And when you have that kind of system, it just can't work. There's no way that the American public benefits from it. And then when you have research that's done by a government official on, for example, a new vaccine, the actual government researcher or the team can get royalties on that drug or that vaccine from the government on top of their salaries. So there's so much of an incentive for corruption. And then there's a government law saying that you can't sue a vaccine company in America for anything other than fraud. So you have to actually prove what they were thinking, which you can never really prove. So there's been such an incentive for corruption. And Bobby Kennedy has fought all these battles, and he recognized that he had to go on the national stage to actually start pushing things back, because what he saw was that he could have victory after victory, but children were still suffering more and more.
When we talk about the media and how they hate Bobby so much, do you feel like this is because of obviously big media, the mainstream media is funded by the pharmaceutical industries after every media show, funded by Pfizer, Moderna is involved now. Is that why? Because they're getting their money from that healthcare industry. And obviously, Bobby's been standing against the obesity epidemic, the issues with getting the vaccines tested. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, there are only two countries on the planet that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise, and that is New Zealand and the United States. And sort of the way that process works is that, the public sees these ads and they don't even really know why they're seeing them. So what they see is an ad for a new product. They can't even pronounce the name much of the time. Then they hear this incredible list of disclaimers that it can cause this, and this, or even death. But what it is the big pharmaceutical companies then are in the position of being able to influence the editorial content, that they're the biggest advertisers for places like CNN. And so that then those places don't feel that they have the power, and the people working there are constrained in the kinds of stories they can cover. And if they don't do it in the right way, they get fired. So they do this for power. They do it for influence. They do it for propaganda purposes to control what the public believes. And so many people, mostly right now, Democrats, don't realize that they've been brainwashed, that they've been subjected to this incredible indoctrination. And the old Democratic Party would have fought to the death against government propaganda, or corporate propaganda. They'd have fought for as many voices as possible to be able to talk to the public. And they would want the decisions to be made in kind of the marketplace of ideas, so that we would hear 10 different points of view. We would look at all the different studies, and then we would start to think about what's best for the public or what's best for our own children. And we would want as much freedom as possible. So the DNC keeps talking about wanting to protect freedom and Donald Trump being some kind of threat to that. But the truth is that they want to force us to do all kinds of things, and they want to control what we do, what we think, what we read. And there's a federal judge in one of Bobby Kennedy's big freedom of speech lawsuits who says that he has never seen or heard of a time in U.S. history where there were more censorship, where there was more constraint on free speech than right now.
I want to end with a question on Nicole Shanahan. I didn't know anything about her until she started running, Tony. She's sharp as a tack. She's very, very good on health. I have a family member with autism. She does as well with her daughter. I think she's right, in the thick of things with that, with the medical freedom movement. And she was a progressive, as was I. And we've kind of just saw what's going on, as you stated throughout the program, with the Democratic Party. Nicole Shanahan, Tony. Tony, with that said, there's been talk online, and obviously this is a little bit down the road, of Nicole Shanahan maybe running for governor of California sometime soon. What is your take on Nicole Shanahan running for governor, or even if it's not governor of California, being in some sort of political position down the road, because she does have a bright future, I feel like.
Yeah, I think she's really becoming a great leader. She's really been willing to stand up and make these strong statements based on doing a lot of research, based on really being willing to question her own views in the past, much like Bobby Kennedy has, where he went to the border and he totally changed his view on the border, where he's looked at all kinds of things and been willing to listen to people who he disagrees with. And Nicole is exactly like that. She's incredibly smart. She's incredibly inquisitive. She's looked at all of these different things, and she really wants to make the world better. She really wants to fight for children. And, California is a tough state, and it's a state where propaganda has really gotten through to a lot of people that it's really hard for people there to comprehend what's happening. And so her as a candidate for governor, I think would be a great battle. It would be a tough battle, but I think that she's kind of ready for that battle now, that she's been censored, she's been vilified. You know, there've been all these lies written everywhere on her. So there's not much more that can be done to her that hasn't been done. And she's obviously ready to fight. She said very clearly she's in this fight to the very end.
Tony Lyons, again, the president and founder of Skyos Publishing, skydustpublishing.com. He is the co-founder of American Values Pact 2024, supporting Bobby Kennedy Jr. Tony, thanks so much for coming on. Hope to have you on again sometime soon, and keep up the amazing work you guys are doing to really help people get healthy again and pushing Bobby's political career forward.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me on.